would really like to formally welcome our guest speaker for this evening. And he is Professor Ian Trueman, Emeritus Professor of Plant Ecology from the University of Wolverhampton. Now, Ian has made over his career an outstanding contribution to science, and particularly in the fields of botany, plant ecology, vegetation analysis, and in particular in habitat restoration. And this contribution was recognised in 2012 when he was awarded a medal for his outstanding contribution to nature conservation by the UK Wildlife Trusts. So we're really delighted to have such an eminent speaker this evening. And Ian is going to talk about the flora of Sutton Park, both with a little f and a big F, and he'll explain what I mean by the capitalisation and the non-capitalisation, I think, when we get going. But I am now going to hand over to Ian and give him the floor, and I can hear you all giving him a very warm round of applause as we welcome him to the floor. So over to you, Ian. Thank you very much.
Right. Good evening, everybody. So, a flora. A flora is a book about the flora with a lowercase f, which is basically the plants of a particular area. And national floras are mostly about identification, but local floras are much more about distribution and ecology of the species where they grow. Now, Sutton Park is a big park, but you might wonder why we wanted to write a Flora of Sutton Park. Well, it's a very special place. It's very difficult to overestimate the botanical significance of Sutton Park. This is the reason why almost the whole area is an SSSI, a Site of Special Scientific Interest. There are 4,000 of those designated and protected. And a National Nature Reserve, there are only 229, which means they're so special that Natural England keeps, well, in many cases, they actually manage them, not in this one. So why is it special? Well, in a phrase, because it's got very poor soil. This is probably the same reason, the reason why it's also very important archaeologically, because the soil is so poor here that people have not been able to actually make a living out of it, and they've left it alone. The reason the soil is poor is that most of it is on what was always brought up to call bunter pebbles, that we've got to call the Kidderminster Formation of the Sherwood Sandwood group now. It's a sandstone group now, which is basically a substrate made of large pebbles, which, as you might imagine, generates a very, very well-drained, poor soil, poor in plant nutrients. That's things like nitrogen and phosphorus. Plant nutrients, so what we're talking about here is fertility, and fertile soils often have very poor floras because a small number of competitive species can make use of this fertility and swamp everything else. Also, it's a very base poor soil because rain has washed out all the bases. The bases are quite often minor nutrients in themselves, but the main effect they have is on the pH of the soil, and this very strongly affects the sort of species which can live there. Right, so that's why we're doing it. And this is a map we're working on, a new map we're working on at the park. Perhaps I ought to explain that we, in this particular instance, is, in the first instance, myself and Mike Poulton, who are the main lunatics in charge of this enterprise. And then after that, the Birmingham and Black Country Botanical Society, and also Eco-Record. Eco-Record is the Biological Records Centre for Birmingham and Black Country, based on the Wildlife Trust. And Andy of Eco-Record is the man who does the maps for us, and this is the map that he's working on at the moment. And Sutton Park is really divided into two parts. The left-hand side, the western side, is open, and the right-hand side is largely wooded. And these are ancient woods. They in the trade, an ancient wood is a wood that's been there at least since the 16th century, and these woods have been there a lot longer than the 16th century. They probably go back to before when humankind were around, really. They're not the most interesting part of the, despite that, they're not the most interesting part of the site. In Victorian times, they rejoiced in replanting large amounts of the ancient woodlands. So there's a lot of conifers in the ancient woodlands. And the other point is that on the base poor soils that we have here, the ancient woodlands consist of oak birch woodlands with a pretty poor field layer, with not an awful lot of interesting species, not even bluebells usually. And what makes it worse in Sutton Park is we have this understory of holly. Now, I like holly, but there's just so much holly in Sutton Park, it's not true, and it forms a sort of a shrub layer in the wood, and it means that very little light gets down to the ground level in most places, and so there's not an awful lot down there. So the woodlands, although very beautiful, are not the places that botanists really sort of very keen on. You may remember that in winter 2015-16, I think it was, there was an attempt to get an awful lot of the holly out of Hollyhurst. Perhaps wasn't a very good idea from an archaeological point of view. I mean, the known sites were protected, but the sites which weren't known were obviously not going to be protected. And probably they'd never had this heavy machinery in there before. However, they got rid of the holly, and I'm afraid what we've got as a result is lots of holly seedlings and lots of regrowth of the holly and not a lot else. But these are early days yet. It might turn out to be more interesting in future. On the other hand, there are wet woodlands in the park along the two main streams in the park, which are the Longmore Brook and the Ebrook. Plants Brook, some people call it nowadays. And the wet woodlands are probably not as old as the ancient woodlands. They were probably a lot more open 100 or so years ago, but they are they're very, very interesting woodlands. And this is a botanist plant. I'm sorry, you're going to have to meet a few grasses and sedges tonight, which is probably not to your taste, but this is white sedge, Carex canescens. And this we find mostly in the Ebrook Valley, in alder woodland and birch willow woodland down by the Ebrook in various places. And on the right is a map of its distribution in Britain. This is produced by Botanical Society of British Isles, and it involves people making lists of plants to grow in every 10 kilometers square. Each one of those dots is a 10 kilometers square. And if it's present in one of those squares, it gets a dot. And the most recent dots, the blue ones, the red ones are fairly recent. And then there are sort of paler ones which go back into time. And you can see that Sutton Park is in two of these 10 kilometer squares, SP09 and SP19 to be exact. And I've sort of vaguely shown where they are with this arrow. And this particular sedge is in both of those squares, but you can see that it's at the very edge of its distribution in Britain. There's a great big absence of it in central England, in the lowlands basically of England. It reappears to a certain extent further south, but that's about it. And you get used to this picture because this is a picture of so many species in the park. You can see it's very common in Scotland. It makes its way down through the Lake District and the Pennines, and it's there in the Welsh Hills. And as you come further south and east, it disappears altogether. And Sutton Park is one of the most southerly and easterly places where you can find it. And you can also see that it's growing in a layer of moss, and that's sphagnum moss. And to find woodlands with vast areas of sphagnum moss, such as we get in Sutton Park, is very, very, very unusual in the lowlands. Okay, the other half of the park is open, well, mostly open anyway, and it consists of heathland, or perhaps we ought to say heathland and acid grassland. And this is really a man-made habitat. It's classically produced in Britain when, in Neolithic times, when human beings started to clear the forest, they chose the thinner, more open forests to clear, and they grazed them, and they may even try to grow crops on them. But quite often, as in these particular cases, the soil was so poor that after a few decades or maybe centuries, the soil was exhausted, and all that would grow there were certain acid-loving plants, such as members of the heather family, and you end up with heathland and acid grassland, which is grasses which have the same requirements. And this must have happened very early in Sutton Park, underneath the Roman road in Sutton Park. The soil underneath the Roman road is exactly the sort of acid soil, the podzol, which is characteristic of the park now. So it must have happened in very, very early time. And not a lot has happened since, to be honest, in Sutton Park. Most of the pools were made later, and people have made various attempts to cultivate it, but they've all been completely disastrous, really. Right, so this is one of the classical heathland types in Sutton Park. We have two, really, one in which heather is dominant and one in which a mixture of heather and western gorse is dominant. Now, this is the gorse that flowers in the autumn. You'll be aware that when gorse is in bloom, love's in season, because the common gorse is in flower from Christmas until about June, and the western gorse is in flower from July through the autumn, so love's always in season. But this is an interesting vegetation type because characteristically it's found on the west coast of Britain. It starts at about Southampton Water and it works its way round southwest England and round Wales, and it gets about as far as the Isle of Man, and then it stops. But in the Midlands, it makes this sudden dash across the Midlands, and we find it on the Longmynd, and we find it in Sutton Park, and it even makes it just about to the east coast at one or two places. So it's quite an interesting vegetation type in itself, not one to sit on, I might add. Right, the dry heathlands have a number of quite uncommon species. I've put three of them up here. One of them's a grass. Apologies again for talking about grasses. Most heathland, the grass is a grass called sheep's fescue. It's one of the major grasses of heathland. But in some part, we don't get any sheep's fescue. There's just the odd occasional plant that we've found in one or two marginal situations, completely replaced by fine leaf sheep's fescue, which is a different species, and is not really at all commonly recorded in England at all. It's just possible that it's under-recorded because, of course, not everybody can do grasses, but we'll leave that on its own. On the other hand, Cowberry, nobody can mistake Cowberry. This is another member of the heather family, closely related to bilberry, because we get plenty of bilberry in the park, but we also get cowberry. And this is, again, on the edge of its distribution in Sutton Park. And crowberry, which is not a member of the same family, but quite close. I don't know, I've never tried to eat the fruits of this, whether they're edible, I'm not entirely sure. But we get a little bit of that in Sutton Park. And if you look at the maps, it's the same map again. You can see that these species are associated with the north and west of Britain. Sutton Park is an outlier of the Scottish and the Welsh hills. It's weird. In fact, what it suggests to me is that what we think of as upland vegetation used to be present in the lowland of Britain, and it's mostly been wiped out. And there's only a few places, such as Sutton Park, where it still remains. But you can see that both those species are present in Sutton Park, and they are at the very edge of their distribution. This is practically none further south and east in England. Right. Well, now this is one of our drone images again. This is looking. You can see Longmore Pool and Longmore Brook over here. I don't know if you can see my arrows. And here we can see the track that's going down from Bannersgate car park to you have to make allowances for the fact that I'm an old man and can't remember anything about Roughton's Well, just across the pool there. And you can see the dry heathland here, and possibly here too. And you can see that there are changes taking place here. And what's taking place is getting wet. And if you walk across there, you'll find it's getting very wet. And don't try and do it unless you've got wellies on, because you won't get very far. And it's not wet because of the water in the pool or the stream. In fact, it's the exact opposite. One of the characteristics of bunter pebbles is the water can pass very easily through this. And the water is passing through it. And as we go down towards the stream, it comes out in the slope. There's hundreds of little springs all over. So the water is appearing from out of the ground. And that's why it's wet. And in fact, that's feeding the stream and the pool, and it's not the other way around, which is a very good thing, as we will find out later on. The characteristic plant of a lot of this wet heath is a plant called cross-leaved heath, which is another member of the heather family, with rather larger flowers with the petals joined together and the leaves in groups of 4, hence a cross-leaved. It's not just bad-tempered, it's got leaves like a cross. And mixed with that, we get areas which are even wetter, where the dominant species are cotton grasses, common cotton grass, and also haresfoot cotton grass as well. And this is so wet you could almost call it mire, which is means that it's wet all the year round. So just as the dry heath is a matrix of heather and grassland, so the wet heath is a matrix of wet heath proper with Erica tetralix and base poor mire dominated by cotton grasses and similar plants. The wet heath and the wet mires have a whole range of interesting species in them. Here's another sedge for you, star sedge. This little sedge at the top left-hand corner here is characteristic of this sort of habitat. Yet another member of the heather family, another Vaccinium Cranberry, with tiny leaves in trailing stems, beautiful little flowers, and huge fruit, which are edible, are cranberries, much nicer than those horrible American ones that you buy in the shops. And then we have the sundew. You're probably aware of the sundew, which is a carnivorous plant. It catches insects, and this goes along with it growing on sites which are poor in nitrogen, because it's after them for their nitrogen. That's all it wants. And down here we have a water buttercup, a water crowfoot, Ranunculus homeophilus. These are the sorts of plants we get in the wet heath and the acid mire. And again, same sort of picture that we've seen before. There's the distribution of Drosera on the left. That's the sundew. And you can see that it's pretty scarce in lowland England, very common in parts of Wales and Scotland. It's getting very scarce in the park. When I first started to visit the park, it was present in a number of sites, and there's only one small area in the Longmore Valley where I know it now. And if you know it from any other places in the park, tell us, please, we'd like to know. But it does seem to be disappearing in the park. And that's cranberry on the other side, which is a scarcer plant on a British scale. And you can see again that it's present in the park, but it's almost isolated from the rest of its distribution in the park. This is the other stream valley. This is not the Longmore Valley. This is the Ebrook Valley, and there you can see Little Bracebridge Pool and Bracebridge Pool down there, and beyond those you can see the railway line, enthusiastically planted with conifers. And then beyond that again we can see is it Lower Arena Pool, which has been cultivated in the past, and Streatley Heath and Streatley Wood up there. And this has got the same sort of pattern. We go from dry, it doesn't look very dry because these pictures were taken in the very early spring of 2017, no, 18. And it was very, very wet. But we go from dry heath into wet heath and into various mires as we get down towards the Ebrook, which comes down here through Little Bracebridge Pool and into Bracebridge Pool and so on. Now, the interesting thing, there's an awful lot of this wetland, which has got a lot of scrub in it, as you can see, is not base poor. It's not acid wetland, as we've talked about up to now. It's much more base rich. The water which is coming out of the surface has got quite a lot of lime in it. It's got quite a lot of calcium in it and magnesium. And this brings about an entirely different sort of flora. And we get exactly the same picture in the Longmore Valley. There's a Longmore Pool again. There's Longmore Pool over here on the right. And we've got a Longmore Brook here. And you can see all this wetland with all these millions and millions of little streams appearing out of the soil. And as you move down towards the stream, we go from acid wetlands into base-rich wetland. And we don't really know why. Possibly some of the pebbles that make up parts of the bunch of pebbles are limestone pebbles, and therefore the water is picking up dissolved lime. But for whatever reason, the pH goes up from something like 4 all the way to 6 in places, and we get an entirely different sort of vegetation. And this is a very much richer sort of wetland vegetation. It's a beautiful vegetation. It's known in the trade as an M10 mire. M10 is a classification. We have a national vegetation classification. And this is M10, which is it's known as the M10 dioecious sedge butterwort mire. But all sorts of other plants grow there as well. Butterwort is another carnivorous plant with pretty blue flowers and flat rosettes of leaves which catch flies. Spot pimpernel is tiny little plant with beautiful little pink flowers. Meadow thistle is an interesting plant. It's completely unprickly. You can sit on this one without any ill effects. And it's interesting because it's got the opposite distribution to most plants in Sutton Park, i.e. it is commoner south and east of the park. And in the park, it's getting towards its northern and western limits. It's not entirely in Sutton Park. There are a number of sites in Walsall, for example, where it occurs, but it is getting close to its limits. Fleece Edge is yet another little sedge, very characteristic of base-rich mires. Dioecious sedge is a tiny little sedge, which these are female plants, but there are also male plants, and this is a very scarce plant. Marsh lousewort is a pretty little member of the well, it's difficult to predict what family it's in at the moment. I still think of it as the member of the foxglove family, but it isn't anymore. There's a distribution of a couple of species, and you can see it's exactly the same as usual. These are species associated with the north and west of Britain, but you can see that in the case of these two, dioecious sedge and butterwort, they're almost isolated. We are getting well out of the regions where they grow. So you can see that Sutton Park is very important as an outlier of the distribution of many species. As you get down towards the Longmore Brook itself, the pH goes up more and more, and we get a mire which is called a calcareous mire, which is even more base rich than the M10 we've just been talking about. And characteristic flora included the beautiful grass of Parnassus, which is vaguely related to saxifrages, and yet another sedge, Carex diandra, which is very rare in England, and knotted pearlwort. You may be aware of pearlwort. It grows in walls and in cracks in pavements with a very, very small green flowers. And this one has much larger white flowers, and again is entirely, well, is only found in these very base-rich mires. And here we've got some distribution maps again, and you can see again that Panacea really is a very northern plant. It's not even common in Wales, except in Anglesey. We get it on in limestone Derbyshire to some extent, and then we got this one site for it here, and it reappears a little bit in East Anglia. And as for Carex diandra, you might think that was a very boring looking plant, but you can see that it's a very, very uncommon plant in the whole of Britain. And it's almost unknown in England, except in Sutton Park. Right, so you can see that from all this, Sutton Park is a site of special scientific interest, botanically, because its flora is so unusual for central Britain. But it's not only the existing flora, it's the seed bank. In other words, the soil of Sutton Park has got a bank of seeds in it, which is quite remarkable as well. This is a place near at the northern end of Westwood Coppice, where there was a sewage outflow in, was it 2013? And give them their due, they came in and they scraped off all the sewage, and they scraped off the soil as well over quite a large area, and we were left with this bare area, some of which gathered water. And an awful lot of interesting species appeared at this site. Many of them were some of the uncommon species of the park, which we had not known in this area. And one of them in particular, this one, the small pepperwort, which looks remarkably like a small version of redshank rather than pepperwort, is a nationally scarce species. That means it occurs in less than 110 kilometre squares in Britain. Now, we had known it in the park. It had been known in the past in the park. And the last place it was seen was in the ditch that runs down from Bannersgate Car Park to Longmore Pool. But nobody'd seen it there for ages. And so miles away from, well, not miles away from that, about a kilometre away from that, when they scraped this off, it appeared in vast quantities in the shallow water of the scrape where the sewage was. So this is a sign that the soil is just full of a seed bank of some of the rare species of the park. Right, so we're not the first people who are interested in the flora of the park. There are records in the park going back to the 16th century, but the first person who made a systematic study of it was James Bagnall. I would very much like to have met James Bagnall, but I'm afraid it was a bit before my time. He died in 1918, I think. And he described himself, let's see if I've got the quote somewhere so I don't say it wrong. Yes, he described himself as a manufactory clerk in Birmingham. And he joined the Birmingham Natural History and Microscopical Society. And he was allocated Sutton Park as a place to explore and to record the species of. And by 1876, he produced a flora of Sutton Park, which was a complete list of all the plants that he found in the park, saying where they grew, what sort of habitat they grew in, and whereabouts in the parks they were to be found. And this is still available on the web. It's been updated by Peter Coxhead brilliantly, but you can get at it on the web quite easily. And it's a fascinating picture of how the park was in the 19th century. James went on from this. He, in the Sutton Park flora, he described the mosses, and by 1991, he produced a flora of the whole of Warwickshire. In those days, Sutton Park was in Warwickshire, and it still is in the recording Vice County of Warwickshire, because botanists never change things like that. We stick with them forever. Which gave some more information about it, and that included the ferns and the mosses and the liverworts and the lichens and the fungi. These are still, I mean, this is considered to be one of the best 19th century floras, Vice County floras. So he was a very important person, and he carried on being a central figure in the Birmingham Natural History Society until he died, really. Then there was a bit of a gap after that, few records, but there was a bit of a gap until, and again, it was the same sort of thing coming together. Dorothy Cadbury and Jack Hawkes from Birmingham University, and Robert Reddett, who was an employee of Birmingham Council. He retired as chief accountant of Birmingham City Public Works Department in 1961. Set about producing a new flora of the county of Warwickshire, and this still Vice County of Warwickshire, which is a vast tome which I got on my shelf next to a lot of other vast tomes of floras. Robert Reddett, as part of this, and this started about 1950, was produced in 1971. And at the same time, Robert Reddett was recording Sutton Park on a 1 kilometre square basis. In other words, you're making lists of plants from each 1 kilometre square. And in 1971, he also produced a new flora of Sutton Park, in which the 1 kilometre square distribution of all the species was recorded. The next thing that happened was that in 1991, Harold Fowkes, who was a local botanist, who some of you may know, I've known the late Harold Fowkes now, unfortunately, and Peter Coxhead, who is very much not the late Peter Coxhead, he's still going strong, and he's been an absolute terror for Sutton Park, with terror of strength for Sutton Park in producing details of distributions of plants and animals as well in the park, and has helped us a great deal with the flora that we're doing at the moment. But this is basically it's what you would call a checklist. It's a list of all the species that grow in the park, with only a few notes about species which are on the brink of disappearing or have reappeared de novo after Reddett's time. Oh God, it's frozen. Oh, there we are. Right, the next thing that happened was us turning up. Now, Birmingham Black Country is a place. You've only got to look at the 1 kilometre. You've only got to look at the one. Well, let's call it the 1 inch map of Birmingham to see that you're looking at one conurbation. It includes Birmingham. It includes, although you might not like it, Sutton Coldfield, and it includes, and we don't like it either, the Black Country, boroughs and towns, the Endless Village, an enormous conurbation. And it was very poorly known botanically because it's in 3 vice counties. Part of it, most of Birmingham, but not all, is in Warwickshire. Part of it, Dudley and the rest of Birmingham, is in Worcestershire, and an awful lot of the Black Country is in Staffordshire, Vice County, Staffordshire. And these all have separate record systems. So it's very difficult to get an idea of what was common and what was rare in the conurbation. And anyway, botanists tend not to want to look at the urban parts. They tend to want to go out into the fields and mountains, and who can blame them? But we decided to produce a new flora, and in doing so, we re-recorded on a 1 kilometre square basis the whole of Birmingham and Black Country, all 715 1 kilometre squares, of whom some of them were obviously the ones in Sutton Park, and we covered that in 2005 and spent many happy days recording plants in Sutton Parks in 2005. But I never felt we'd done it justice, really. And so we decided to come back and do it in more detail. And here you can see the park divided into small squares, and each one of those is 1/4 of a kilometre square. If you take, for example, this is up by the Little Bracebridge and Bracebridge Pool, and this 1 kilometre square is 0998, SP 0998. And you can see a sort of a very scruffy pencil line drawn, it divided into 4 1/4 kilometre squares. And what we decided to do was to record it on a 1/4 kilometre square basis. In other words, we made a list of species for every one of those 1/4 kilometre squares in the whole of the park. Now, this was only possible. This was only really possible because of satellites. Because if you've wondered about Sutton Park, you must have noticed how easy it is to get lost. To know where you are is very, very, very difficult indeed. But because you now have these wonderful little machines, these GPS machines, which you can take into the park and press a button, it tells you exactly where you are. It was possible to record at 1/4 kilometre square level. And this is what we decided to do. And we started doing it in 2015. And we did most of it over about 2 years, and we finished off over the intervening years. And there we are. There's one of our group. This was a particularly auspicious day out. I'll tell you who some of these people are. I'm just looking for my list to make sure I get it right. Over here on the left, we have Danny Squire, who is the chief ranger for the park. Next to it, we have Mike Hodder, the archaeologist. We got his feet wet several times in the park, but he's been very good to us, as Mike. This couple here, this is Monica and John Walton, and they're the BSBI recorders for the Vice County of Warwickshire. So they've got a vested interest in the park. This is Peter Coxhead himself here. And the rest of us are a sort of gaggle of ancient and venerable and young botanists. And we are sitting rather disrespectfully in a drier part of an area of Baserich Mire close to Little Bracebridge Pool, where another Midland botanist, Brian Laney, had rediscovered yet another upland species at the southeastern edge of its range, lesser skullcap, Scutillarium minor. And that's what that one looks like. And it tends to grow in that site, it tends to grow on ant hills. It covers the ant hills in a rather charming way. And it's got the same sort of pattern as distribution as many of the other species we talked about. The first time you really come across any quantity of it going west is on Tiddeston Clee. There's quite a lot on Tiddeston Clee. And then as you go further west still and get into Montgomeryshire, there's quite a lot on the upland plateaus in Montgomeryshire. But there it is in quantity in 2 different places, actually, we found in Sutton Park. Not only did we do the whole of the park proper, but we looked at both of the golf courses. We didn't take loads of people into the golf courses because golf and botanists do not mix. Botanists don't look where they're going, and golf is a dangerous sport if you're not looking where you're going. In fact, I looked at Buddleia golf course with Danny Squire, who made sure I didn't get killed by golf balls, and we looked at this at the Sutton Coldfield golf course, and I brought in a Shropshire botanist who is wise in the way of golf. The first thing you need to know is which way they're playing. And the second thing is to pay attention to what they're doing. And of course, botanists couldn't possibly pay attention to what anybody's doing because they're that busy peering at the ground. So I can't advise you to go in there, but we felt we needed to do the golf course. It's a matter of completion. And the Buddleia golf course is not very characteristic. It covers a lot of the southern margin of the Longmore Pool below Longmore Brook below Longmore Pool, but much of it had been cultivated previously before it came a golf course, so it's not terribly exciting. But the Sutton Coldfield golf course is still very much as it must have been before it was a golf course. Obviously, the greens are different, but the fairways are the same sort of acid grassland and heathland that we find in the rest of the park. There's not so much wetland, but I suspect that the course was planned to include as least of the wetland as possible. It goes around a lot of wetland. The interesting thing was some of the most interesting plants on Sutton Coldfield golf course were around the bunkers. So it was specifically associated with the golf course. And here we're looking at situations where we have very, very dry, drought-liable soils, as you can imagine. And in them we found a series of winter annuals. This pretty little grass is called silver hairgrass. And this typical winter annual, the seeds germinate in the late summer, early autumn. And then while there's quite a lot of water about through the winter, they grow slowly. And then they flower and they fruit very early in the season. And then they die. They're annuals. And the seed is spread out. When the drought comes and there's no water to support them whatsoever. And there's a whole series of little winter annuals around the bunkers, which is quite scarce elsewhere in the park. This one has been recorded previously in the park, but we hadn't found it while we were surveying the park. We found its little brother, the earlier hairgrass, but not the silver hairgrass. And we also found bird's foot in this sort of situation, not bird's foot trefoil, although it's in the same family. It's got this lovely name, Ornithopus purpucillus. And this is another annual of these sort of dry situations. And Bagnall knew it in the park, but Reddit didn't record it at all. And so we were quite pleased to find this, and it was around the edge of the bunkers. Interestingly enough, after the first big drought, summer drought in, was it 2018, it appeared in some quantity in the southern part of Sutton Park as well. So again, it's a plant that's obviously lying there in the seed bank. There are, however, several plants that we've not been able to find in the park. This is deer grass. This is not a grass at all. It's related to the sedges, and it grows in wet heath. It's a plant of wet heath, and it is recorded from the park. And I think it was last recorded in the park in the 1970s, I think, but we can't find it anyway. It seems to have gone, which is a pity because there are two sorts of wet heath. One with deergrass and one without. And the one with deergrass is a much more westerly one than the one without. And so it would be nice to know whether it is still there and whether it is part of this vegetation. But there we are. We can't find it. Meadow thistle, as I've already said, is present in the Ebrook Valley, but we haven't been able to find it recently in the Longmore Valley at all. Which we'd like to, so we keep looking for it. If you know it in the Longmore Valley, let us know. Marsh lousework is in most valleys, as I've said, but it has a smaller brother or sister, common lousework, which, as the name suggests, is a bit more common and tends to grow in drier heathlands. And this used to be present in the park, but we can't find it now. It seems to have disappeared. We had one or two records in 2005, I think, but I don't think we've seen it since. Then there is a little group of plants which are associated with neutral grasslands. Now, neutral grasslands are ones which are not base rich and are not base poor, and you wouldn't expect to find a lot of those in the park. But Reddit had a few records for neutral grassland species, particularly this one, Bethany, which is a pretty plant, which you probably know from elsewhere, but we can't find it in the park. It seems to have disappeared. If you know any examples of it, let us know. There is a series of plants from shallow water, which presumably once used to grow around some of the lakes, which we can't find. This is a photograph from probably one of the canals in Birmingham of that country. And we can see the greater water plantain with its little 3-petal flower sticking up out of the water. And we can see the broadleaf pondweed leaves floating on the water. This is such a typical sort of situation in shallow water, both quite widely recorded in the park in the past, but we can't find them, they've gone. Is it something that's happening to the water? Question mark. Bell heather. Bell heather is a plant of dry heathland. We've said Erica tetralix is a characteristic of wet heathland. Well, Erica cinerea, bell heather, is characteristic of dry heathland. And this seemed to have disappeared by about 2005. It was present in about 1 kilometre squares in Reddit's time. Why it's gone, we do not know. Cowwheat, Melanpion pratense, is a plant from woodland margins, and it used to be quite common again in 6 or perhaps more squares. It used to be very well known in the clearings in Streatley Wood. A student from Birmingham University did a project on it as recently as 2005. It's gone, we can't find it. On the other hand, we've got some new species in the park. This one you very likely will know, the Himalayan balsam. Pretty flowers and beloved of children because they touch the fruits and they explode and throw the seeds out. But it's an absolute monster, this one. It's what's known in the trade as an invasive alien. Which sounds a bit racist, but anyway, it's escaped from gardens, and it just loves water margins and wet woodlands in Britain, and it very rapidly becomes dominant in them. And there were 2 records. Reddit had it recorded from 2 places in the park, but it's got a lot more common since. I mean, almost hate to show you this picture. This is in the woodland between Little Bracebridge Pool and Bracebridge Pool, and there's a great big patch of it in there. You can see all these leaves here are Himalayan balsam. I mean, all you can really do is to pull up every one before it sets seed, which sounds easy, but you can see there's a lot to pull up there, and it's the most difficult place to work in. You can very easily, as it has happened to me there, get stuck in this because it is very wet in places, and it's going to act as a place from which it will spread into other parts of the park, in my opinion. It's also present around Windley Pool as well. Anyway, so we've done the work and we are getting together the flora itself, and this is perhaps what the cover will look like. It might be. On the other hand, this is another version that we put together. I prefer the first one because it gives more of an impression of how big the park is, because it's its size. I shall never forget once a long time ago, I was going to China and we took an airplane from Birmingham to Helsinki as the first stage, and we took off. And we went over Sutton Park, and I looked down and I was absolutely gobsmacked at this huge expanse of heathland in the middle of the conurbation. It's a most remarkable place. Anyway, so we're still working on a lot of things. This is the contents page of the book as far as we can see it. Rather than going through them, I'll go through them by looking at them one at a time here. The introduction will have this broad habitats map that we're working on in it. and we'll give a little bit of the history of recording in the park, things like that. The next chapter is a sort of a romp in the park, really, shall we say? Every time we made a visit to the park, we wrote them up, and so each of these visits that we made to the park has got its own little short description of what we saw and what happened, and we've put them together. The page numbers will change, obviously, that's why they're in red, from the different gates, and each time there's a little map showing the area that we actually covered on the walk and where we went, and some of the things that we see. They're not recommended routes, incidentally, because if you go off the paths in the park, you're on your own, basically. In fact, never do that. Never go off the paths in the park on your own, especially if you go into the wetlands. You need to have somebody with you, preferably, to leave a message about where you are as well. These are some of the pages in chapter 2, and so it will be illustrated. Mike Poulton has taken lots of lovely pictures in the park. I've taken some terrible pictures. I've never mastered the art of keeping my camera still, but Mike has, and he's produced some lovely pictures, which will be well worth looking at, even if you don't read the words. I suspect a lot of people will not do that. Anyway, the next chapter is what we call a physical background. It's mostly the archaeological background, and it was almost all written by Mike Hodder, the archaeologist, and there you can see him talking to botanists, some of whom are listening. As a teacher myself, I know the feeling well, but Mike has written a fantastic chapter with lots of new maps. This is the part before the deer park, and it's based on the LiDAR image of the park, which is a new thing. This is another. I'll mention this one now because it appears in this chapter. This is about the drainage and the water movement in the park, and it's a map showing the CSOs. Now, if you don't know what a CSO is, you should know. It means combined sewer outflow, I think, isn't it? I always have trouble with this one. Anyway, whatever it's called, it's where at some time in the past, people have extended the pristine water systems of the park to join on to the sewers that pass down the western side of the park. And under storm conditions, they are allowed to allow them to overflow into the stream system of the park. Now, this I just find this very difficult to get my head around. Here we've got a national nature reserve and also a public park, and they're allowed to shove vast quantities of sewage into the park whenever the mood takes them. It does not seem to me to be like a very good idea, and it's very, very bad for the flora. I mean, this is in the Longmore Valley. The Longmore brook comes up the middle here, and you can see either side of it, we've got the dry and wet heath. And along the stream here, all this tall, bright green stuff is great willow herb, Epilobium hirsutum, which is a plant which is associated with very fertile conditions, and it swamped everything else. And so we've got this strip of vegetation along the stream. We've also got bulrush typha in there, and an alien, rather pretty little alien with yellow flowers called monkey flower or something like that. But it's right exactly where the most important base-rich parts of the Longmore Brook are, and there it is, and it's there because of the fertility that's coming down in the streams due to the fact that we've got these CSOs. bar. This is a vegetation map of the park, which was produced again by Eco Record, mostly from aerial photographs with some ground truthing by us botanists. And so the next chapter is about the vegetation. It's this map with descriptions of the different sorts of vegetation in the park and lists of the species that grow in the different kinds of vegetation in the park. The next chapter is perhaps the most important, but maybe the least interesting to a lot of people. Is about change in the flora. This is a table showing the number of species that occur in Britain, Birmingham Black Country, Sutton Park at various times. And if we just take the native species, about 50% of Britain's flora is native species. And strange enough, in Birmingham and Black Country, which you'd think would have less native species, has more, if anything, native species. Sutton Park, on the other hand, has many more. You can see that Sutton Park is really a centre of diversity for native species in the park. In Bagnall's database, 84% of the species in the park were native species. By the time you got to Reddit, it had gone down to 81, and it's gone down, I'm afraid, now to 73, but it's still much higher than the national average. And the rest of the chapter is about change. This is about change at the 1 kilometre square level. These circles here are proportional to the number of species in red in the time of Reddit and in blue in our modern surveys. And this particular picture is a picture of species characteristic of changing environments, of environments which are in the process of disturbance and change, so the ones you don't really want. And you can see that the number of species associated with changing environments is increasing tremendously in the edges of the park. Less so towards the centre, but you can see that the outside of the park is becoming more important in the flora of the park now, which is not good news. This is a picture of notable species. These are species which are either nationally considered to be uncommon or are considered to be uncommon in the Warwickshire Vice County. And you can see on the whole, there's not a lot of difference. You can only see a blue circle. It means that there has been no change at all. And you can see that in most scares, there's only a small reduction in the number of these species. But there are a few cases, such as this square here and this square here, where there has been quite a bit of a reduction. This is the square which contains Windley Pool, and it is very clear that the Windley Pool flora has got worse, and this is probably because of all this stuff coming down the stream from the combined sewage outflows. This square here is probably showing a reduction because of what's happening around Keeper's Pool, because north of Keeper's Pool there was a very, very rich mire in Reddit's time, which has unfortunately become badly colonized with rhododendrons, amongst other things. And it's still interesting, but it's not anything like as interesting. But you can see that, generally speaking, the flora is not deteriorating violently compared with what it was in Reddit's time. One of the most important changes is in the development of scrub. This is a picture taken by Steve Falk in 2003 and one by Peter Coxhead in 2014. The same view into the Longmore Valley, and you can see how much more scrub there is now than there was then. This is why there are stock in the park. You know, this is why there are ponies and cattle in the park, because if we don't have the grazing stock, the whole park will become filled with scrub. It will disappear under scrub. This is the little Bracebridge Pool and Bracebridge Pool, and you can see the amount of scrub that's developing in the heathland, and particularly along the Ebrook, upstream from Little Bracebridge Pool. The next chapter will be a chapter about the fungi of the park. Now, fungi are not really plants. So it's a bit of a cheat really to put fungi in there, but it's still in draft at the moment. It's been written by Lucas Large of the Birmingham Museum Service. It will be a checklist, but it will refer back to previous checklists in the park, and it'll have some lovely photographs done by Lucas and also by Mike. And there's another one, that's a beefsteak fungi. There it is, beefsteak fungi. And then there is a lichens chapter. Now, this is Peter James. Now, Peter James was a native of Sutton Coldfield, who went on to become an internationally renowned lichenologist. He worked at the British Museum, Natural History, and he's recorded lichens all over the world, really. And when he retired, he came back to Sutton Park, and he, training up another chap called Mark Pell, between them, produced a new survey of Sutton Park lichens, which was published in the British Lichenological Society Journal in 2010. But since then, Peter has sadly died. Mark has done some more field work in the park, and has produced a new checklist of lichens for the park, which we'll be delighted to put in. And one of the people he worked with, well, several of the people he worked with have been working on the basis of producing a commentary on lichens in the park. Shirley Hancock is masterminding that at the moment. And then this is Simon Phipps. Simon Phipps has taken on the bryophytes, the mosses and liverworts of the park. There are some very useful surveys of bryophytes in the park recently done by Natural England, and Simon has taken them and working with a few more people from our Botanical Society who were willing to take on the bryophytes, has produced a superb new atlas of bryophytes for the park. And that's what 2 pages of it look like there. And this is the first time anybody's trying to map the distribution of bryophytes in the park. Any bryophyte that's in more than 3 1 kilometre squares is mapped. And it's a big step forward for bryophyte recording in the park. This is. We're very grateful for Simon for taking this on. And then the next chapter is the atlas of the bachelor plants, the flowering plants, ferns, and also the conifers, such as they are. And you can see that each 1 kilometre square has got potentially 4 dots in it, because those are the 1/4 kilometre squares. And for each species, we've got something about its ecology, its distribution in Britain, its distribution in Birmingham Black Country and in Vice County Warwickshire and in the park, and also the history of its distribution in the park as well. So that's what the atlas of the park. Those are a couple of pages of the atlas, and a couple more there. So that's the bachelor plant atlas. So that's the flora. We hope to get it out this year. We're still trying to raise the money at the moment. The difficulty we've got is, it will be as cheap as we can possibly make it. Nobody's trying to make any money out of this. The book will be produced at cost, and we hope to keep it down to £20 or even lower. And there will also be a subscriber's price, a cheaper subscriber's price for people who subscribe before we produce it. We've got a publisher, Pisces Publications, who published the Birmingham Black Country Flora have agreed to do it, but we can't, until we've raised all the money, we can't really sign anything. So it's difficult to tell you what the price is going to be and to get you to sign for it. But you can either contact me at this email, or there will be in the follow-up from Zoe, there will be something which will allow you to contact us and put your name down. You won't have to pay any money. We won't come round with the boys if you decide to change your mind later. But basically, we would like to know how many people are likely to want to buy it. So that's as far as I want to go right now. We'll have some questions after this, and then I got in one spring we did a very large number of drone flights in the park. Andy Purcell from the Sandwell Valley naturalists came to the park and did some wonderful drone surveys. And I'll take you for a drone survey of the park for those of you who've not already had enough or are still awake. Here we go then. So we did all this in early spring 2018. You tend to do it in very early spring so you can see through the trees, you know, so there's not a lot of leaves on the trees. The person who did it, as I said before, was Andy Purcell. And we started off in the Longmore Valley, and the main places where we started from were where you can see the two stars, but we also did a preparatory view right by the top end of Longmore Pool as well. There we are. Yes. So this is where we start. That's obviously Bannersgate Car Park, looking a lot smaller to me than it seems to be when I got it's in it. It gives you an idea of the size of it. We're looking across Bolmere Golf Course there to New Oscott on the other side. I think that's what it is. And then the drone turns. It's not turning at all. Oh, we are. The drone then turns east, and you can see Longmore Pool here, and you can see Powell's Pool in the distance, and you can see the Bolmere Golf Course there, and you can see some of the mire starting to appear as well. And now we're turning further round to the northeast, and you're starting to see the Longmore Valley mires and the pool itself. And this area here was enclosed by the miller at Longmore Pool. He kept his stock in it, presumably, and it's been long abandoned, but it's still quite different. You know, it's amazing how long it takes for these sites to come back. You can see Queen's Coppice there on the other side of the stream. And in the distance, you can see the ancient woodlands with lots of conifers in them, which were planted in the 19th century. Now this is a vertical look at where the Longmore Brook comes into Longmore Pool. And these funny little round things here, like beetle haircuts. This is Carex paniculata, which is a great big sedge, and all the dead leaves build up into a sort of a trunk, and then the leaves appear on top of it. It's a most strange plant. And there you can see it growing all the way along the stream there. And then we're going a bit further up the stream, and most of the wetland is on the western side of the stream. But can you see all that white stuff, those white vertical things on the west side of the stream? Those are bulrush typha. Now, there was none of that there in Reddett's time. There was no typha latifolia there in Reddett's time. I put this all out of these bloody sewage, bloody output thing, whatever you call them. However, there we are. Come on, move. There we are. Yeah, so now we're moving round again further to the north, and you can see this is a picture we've seen before, really. But this is the track going off to Roughton's Well. There's the valley of the stream on the right there, and you can see this big patch of scrub starting to appear here. But most of this is the dry heathland, there's the wet heathland. And then we're turning round further to the north, and Westwood Coppice, the edge of Westwood Coppice has appeared to you. Westwood Coppice is a plantation. It was planted in the 18th century. In fact, it was sown, the trees were sown as a seed in the 18th century, which is quite interesting. You can see these big patches of scrub developing in the heathland. You can also see the difference between where the heather is dominant and the green bits are where the western gorse is part of the heathland, and you can see there's lots of scrub. This line across here is a ditch which comes down from the edge of the park at the top of. This is where the scrape was made. This is the same view in the summer, which is prettier to see. It's in late summer, it's September, in August, with the heather in flower and the gorse in flower. But you see how much scrub is developing here, and you can see the ditch there. You can see the trees developing along the ditch, and here is where the sewage outburst happened, and where this is looking into the park at that point, down the sewage scrape. So this is the path we were coming along previously. We're going to return to this path afterwards. And here we are on that path. You see there's more heather areas and heather gorse areas. And as we move further up, we come to Lord, I always get this wrong, Lord Donegal's Ride, isn't it? That's one, which goes from Royal Oak Gate across the park all the way to Blackroot Pool, really. And then we're going a bit further. Oh, now we're looking down Lord Donegal's Ride into the park, and you can get an impression of just how big the site is. I mean, it's a huge site. It would be a huge site anywhere. And in the conurbation, within the built-up area of the conurbation, it's totally remarkable. Lot of scrub. So we're crossing across Lord Donegal's Ride there, and you can see the western arm of the golf course starting to appear up there, and you can see the heathland, the heather-dominated heathland, starts to die out here. And here is wetland again. It's acid wetland. It's not as interesting as the wetland further down the valley, but it's a very large area of wetland, and it's the largest in the park probably. And we carry on further up there. This is where one of these sewer outflows starts, just about there. Whether this scrub here is to do with that, I'm not sure. Whether the scrub has developed in relation to that, I'm not sure, because it would obviously bring fertility, and which would help the scrub. But you can see there's plenty of scrub further on. I mean, this is a ditch here, so why there's no scrub on this side and there's so much scrub on that side, I can think is only due to the fact that at some stage this has been cleared and that hasn't. That's what I guess happened. You can now see the eastern wing of the golf course over here, and there's the western ring. You see they go around the wetland. Right, then the next place we flew from was around Little Bracebridge Pool, and then south of Bracebridge Pool. And there's Little Bracebridge Pool. And we're looking towards, you can see the railway line over right in the top right-hand corner there. So we're looking across Bracebridge Pool towards the railway line. And there's some interesting base-rich wetland just the other side of the track here. But keep out of it because it's very precious. We don't want everybody trampling about it. Little Bracebridge Pool is very shallow. I once tried to take a boat on there, but that was one of the funniest things I've ever tried to do. I'm sure everybody was very amused. So here we can see the pool again and the track, and you can see these areas of wetland and how beset by scrub they are, how much scrub there is there. We're looking down the valley again. So there's Little Bracebridge Pool on the left. There's the railway line coming across, and you can tell it from the conifers that were planted along the railway line. That's Streetley Heath over there. Behind it is Streetley Wood. And this is Lower Arena Field here, which was cultivated during the war and has never really recovered. But you can see that the heath, the wet heath, and the dry heath and the wet heath, all it was wet, but it was just, there's a lot of rain at that time of the year, are okay. But basically the base rich area, the really botanically interesting area, is very much scrubbed over on this side of the railway line. How much the building of the railway line affected that, I'm not sure. I suspect quite a lot. And now we're looking down into it. You can see there are quite a lot of open patches in there. They're very difficult to get into, and even more difficult to get out of once you've got into, as we found to our cost on several occasions. But they are very, very rich botanically. Right, now going further down the Ebrook, beyond Little Bracebridge Pool, we come to Bracebridge Pool. And that's the same picture in the summer, just to give you an idea. And you can see how much scrub there is. I think I've shown you this picture before earlier on. And we're now looking at where the Ebrook comes into the Bracebridge Pool. And you can see that this is different here. This is wet woodland, and in fact was probably a lot more open in the past. And you can see there are even some open areas. This almost all probably used to be base-rich, species-rich vegetation, but slowly and surely it's become overgrown by trees. And it would be an enormous job to get them off, and you would do so much damage in the process. It's very difficult to know what to do. You can. This is looking down Bracebridge Pool again. You can see again this area is distinct from the ancient woodlands either side of Bracebridge Pool. There's the dam at the bottom and the place. This is the other end of the. That's where the dam is on this picture, and this is the car park before you get to the dam. You can see just how much conifers have been planted into Pool Holly that's there. And looking down to the right, again, with Lower Arena Pool starting to appear there, you can see just how much conifer plantation took place in the 19th century in these woods. Now we turn around through 180 degrees and we're looking down from roughly above the same car park towards Blackroot Pool. And this is the so-called ancient monument hill, you know, probably isn't an ancient monument. But you can see this is Four Oaks Park, isn't it, over here, which was cut out of the park in 18th and 19th century. And there's the railway line coming through there. Bagnall was very annoyed about the railway line when it was put in. Very, very annoyed. We're getting up to Blackroot Pool now, and you can see again where the water goes into the pool. The vegetation is different. It's more of this wet woodland, probably not ancient woodland, but older woodland with a really nice field layer, really quite species rich for the park, quite species rich field layer. And then the drone has turned around and is going back up the railway line towards Bracebridge Pool, which you can see in the top right hand corner there. And you can see on this side, next to Upper Nuthurst, you can see this large area of heathland here, which is another lovely piece of heathland, if you like heathland, and one of the best bits in the park. Right, then the next place we flew from was Blackroot Pool Dam, and then further down the canalised part of the stream down from Blackroot Pool. And then later on we went down to Windley Pool and flew from there. And this is again Blackroot Pool, looking up towards the there's the railway line, and there's this older woodland which turns into birch woodland higher up, but it's still got the sphagnum underneath it, and it's still really nice, interesting wet woodland. And you can see it's different from the dry oak woodlands of the Nuthursts there. And then looking in the other direction, this is where they keep a lot of the park's maintenance equipment. But in fact, it's the quarry that was excavated to make the dam when they made Blackroot Pool. So it's an ancient feature in itself, that quarry. And you can see the Blackroot car park there. Again, it doesn't look small. It seems huge when you're there. And next to it, there's this very boring looking piece of grassland, which isn't at all boring. It's a mat grass grassland. It's a very acid grassland with a lot of interesting species in it, which is quite remarkable. And now we're looking round down to the south towards the southern end of the park from the same place. And you can see the donkey sanctuary over here on the right here. And we can see, what do we call these fields here? These were added to the park when they took the area that they built Four Oaks Park on. Anyway, it's the bright green colour tells you that it's not the same as the rest of the park. Even after all these years, even after 200 years, it's still different. This is still looking down in the same direction. There's a donkey sanctuary. And this is where Blades Mill Pool was, and it was drained. And this is quite a good place to see southern marsh orchid in the park. And there's the canalised part of the Ebrook coming down from Blackroot Pool, and that's where we're flying from. Those are markers that tell us, give us an idea of scale. Now we're looking again from the same place in a more in a southwesterly direction towards Keeper's Pool, and that is going to be Powell's Pool in the distance there, and that's going to be Windley Pool there, and this is going to be Hollyhurst here, isn't it? And this wood here, this side of Keeper's Pool, is going to be one of the Nuthursts, I imagine. There's Keeper's Pool. When they demolished the swimming pool thing here, they imported soil, would you believe? And all sorts of weird and wonderful alien species appeared in this. In 2005, we got a list of species which we prefer not to have had. Most of them have gone now, but one species which does seem to have got hold there is Buddleia, butterfly bush, which of course everybody loves because of the butterflies, but is another plant which I can see is going to be a pernicious alien species in the long run. It just grows and grows. So we'll have to keep our eye on that one as well. And as I say, there used to be a nice mire in Bagnalls, as recently as the Reddit's time. There should be a nice mire north of west of Keeper's Pool. This is even further west of Keeper's Pool. This is going further west of Keeper's Pool, and it joins on with the Longmore Valley there. But down here, it's become completely overgrown by scrub, and Danny says it's on his list to clear, but it's going to be a terrible big job to try and clear it. But the flora there is still got a lot of interest, but it's lost a lot of interest since Reddit's time, I'm afraid. And now we're looking across Hollyhurst, and you can see it's been cleared. I mean, this is the only part of the wood where you can see the ground floor, because all the holly has been removed. And there again, we've got Windley Pool and Powell's Pool. And now we've moved down to Windley Pool, and there's the sports area of the park. And you see it's a very small part of the park which is developed for sport. So I don't think we can really complain too much about that. And here's a corner of Windley Pool here, the bottom left-hand corner, right-hand corner. And we're wheeling round over Windley Pool, and you see the trees come right down to the edge at Windley Pool. So possibly on that side, but of course we haven't been able to get into that side because that's all people's gardens. We did notice at this end that people dump stuff out of their gardens into the people with gardens have got this idea that if they cut something down, they've got to get rid of it. I mean, it's compost that it costs you money. You don't want to throw it away, especially not into a wonderful place like Sutton Park. And we go around, you see the trees come all the way around the park, and this is one of the reasons it's lost some of its interest. But it's obviously a lot less nutrient poor than it used to be as well. Now we're wheeling round, so we're over Windley Pool now. We're looking up towards Powell's Pool, and there's a nice older woodland between the two pools there, bit on the nutrient-rich side, not enormously rich flora, but it's not bad at all. It's well worth a visit, but make sure you've got your wellies on because you'll need them. And I think that's probably about as far as we got. We're looking on to Powell's Pool there. This was meadowland for a long time and has never really recovered. It's still not terribly exciting by that side of Powell's Pool. And the same goes for the Boulmere Golf Course area as well. And all sorts of different developments have happened in the past here. Anyway, that's the end. That's my little tour. We didn't obviously get all the way around.
No, but that's lovely, and thank you to everyone who stayed. I'm sure you understand why I was so keen for Ian to show us those wonderful photos, because it really does give an impressive picture of the park. So it's been a long talk this evening. I appreciate that, and I'm really glad that you've all enjoyed it. And I can hear you saying thank you to Ian. Before I thank him one last time, I want to very quickly thank the Wild Green Rotary Club, because they're the people who enabled us to upgrade our Zoom package so that we could host all of you this evening. So my thanks to them. But yes, just remains for me to ask you please to complete the very, very quick survey when you finish. I know you'll be tired after the long event, and to join me in giving a very heartfelt thank you to Ian for his really interesting, informative and beautifully illustrated talk that I think has, even though we're all lovers of Sutton Park, made us love it even more. So thank you very much, Ian. And to all of you, I wish you a good night, and I look forward to seeing you at a future event that FOLIO will hold later next month or later in the year. Thanks very much. Good night, everybody.